Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Philip Cuenco, and I am producer and instructor for the Leica Academy team here based out of Los Angeles. And we'd like to welcome all of you for this very special program we have with a very cool photographer and a friend of Leica. His name is Dennys. A really quick intro to him on how we met, and he's going to get into his background. Long story short, he came in a few years ago. He showed me an image that he took with the Leica S medium format system that we've got, and I knew that this guy was special. And long story short, he's come a long way with having his work throughout the world. You can launch Netflix and see some of his work on some of the TV shows that you watch as a header. So it's kind of cool. You'll see his other work as well on magazines. But we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna have it'll be under an hour for this whole total session. And about 30 to 40 minutes in, we'll open it up to Q&A with the participants that are here that might have questions for Dennys. We'll also have some of the Leica staff here monitoring the chats for us, and we'll try to get to your questions if you have any during the session. So without further ado, we're gonna go ahead and have Dennys Illich. See, Dennys, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, you're live, buddy.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me, Phil. How you doing, buddy?
Good, good. So Dennys, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself onto who these those aren't familiar with your work and your background.
Hi, yeah, thanks. So I'm I don't know, a multifaceted photographer. I've sort of dabbled in a little bit of everything and settled into, I guess, commercial editorial portraiture. You know, I focus taking pictures of people more than anything. That's where my comfort zone is. Although I did start with band photography, and then I did architectural photography. I even did a stint of military photography. Did a lot of advertising images and promotional images for the Australian Defence Force recruiting. Spent time on submarines and in attack helicopters and all that sort of stuff. So that was a lot of fun. And then settled in doing commercial Hollywood portraiture, pictures of actors and so forth. But my background, you know, I started very late in the game. In my sort of early to mid 40s, I became a photographer, and basically was working in the Australian equivalent of Best Buy selling cameras before I decided to buy my own camera, and started taking pictures and submitting them, just you know, red carpet photographs I was taking at parties that I was going to movies, and just submitting them unsolicited to Warner Brothers and Roadshow, and they liked what they saw and they started hiring me. And next thing I knew, you know, two years later, I was, you know, working on Harry Potter and The Matrix and Lord of the Rings, doing promotional work for all those guys. And then I kind of was looking at my bank statements, you know, and I noticed all my paychecks were coming from Los Angeles. All the significant paychecks were coming from Los Angeles. So I decided to move here and worked on getting my green card, which I got about 6 years ago, and I've been an LA resident ever since. And then one fateful day, I walked into the Leica store and gallery in West Hollywood and met you, and the rest is history.
All right. Well, Dennys, let's go ahead and inspire some people here. Let's get into some of your images here.
Sure.
All right. Why don't you take us into the story of this one?
So that magazine, that photograph is probably one of my favorite shots of Daniel Radcliffe, who most people know him from his work with Harry Potter, but since then he has an incredible portfolio of really amazing independent films and projects. He's steered away from tentpole films, you know, and just done projects that he loves. But the photograph that came after that, which was set up, was used on a lot of magazine covers. This particular photograph I love because at the time I was trying to you know, set up lighting and cabling, and you know, I had my camera strapped over my shoulder, and I'm bending over and the camera's whopping around my neck, and I'm tripping over cables and foam. I'm a pretty clumsy person in general, You know, I just heard him chuckling while I was sort of, you know, fumbling around, kind of like, you know, Jerry Lewis. And I turned around and he's just got this mischievous look in his eyes and his hand over his mouth to stop laughing out loudly at me. I just grabbed the camera, snapped a shot, and went back to what I was doing. And I kind of forgot about it. And then, you know, I came across that when I was scanning through images much after the photographs I submitted for Warner Brothers. And it ended up being my favorite photograph, partially because, you know, you kind of really got to know Dan well to know that it's him. He's a little bit obscured by his hand, but he just has that beautiful, mischievous, non-cynical sparkle in his eyes, and I love that photograph so much. It's, you know, I printed that as a 7 foot, you know, wide, like a 60 by 90 in my gallery, it's, you know, beautiful, pure black and white, shot in JPEG mode, and yeah, so that's how that shot came to pass. I've got a lot more, you know, standard, very beautiful, editorial, very, you know, handsome photographs of him, but this is probably my favorite one.
Now, shots like this are obviously pretty intimate. I mean, how do you even get into a room with Harry Potter for 10 years like that? Like, is there a short version that you can talk about?
Yeah, you know, when he, you know, it wasn't a, you know, a process that was given to me on a platter. You know, he was holidaying in Australia at the time. He was very young. I think he was 14. No, sorry, he was 15 years old, and he was holidaying in Australia with his family, with his mum and dad. And all of a sudden, there was an urgent requirement for editorial photographs for him for the upcoming Harry Potter film, which they hadn't done yet. And so they basically put out a call for tender for commercial photographers to submit. And it was, I don't know why they did it this way, but they wanted people to submit samples of work to work with Daniel. The final sort of decision generally came down to his parents then, because they managed him as well. So, you know, I thought I'd give it a go. I hadn't done a lot of stuff other than I had some nice portraits of Orlando Bloom and Liv Tyler from working on Lord of the Rings and so forth. And but I did my research, and I found out just from looking online how much he loved music more than anything, and independent music. He was into independent rock and that sort of thing. So when I did my submission, I was limited by the amount of sort of high profile Hollywood photographs that I had at the time. What I did have a lot of was really cool, grungy pub rock and roll band photographs. And I know there were other photographers in Australia who had done, you know, enormous amount of high profile celebrity portraiture that I was competing against. But 7 out of the 10 photographs that I submitted were rock and roll photographs of completely unknown artists, but they were really cool photographs of people on stages in grungy pubs. And then there were 3 Hollywood portraits. And essentially it came down to him saying, you know, I want to work with this guy, you know, because he, you know, he loved the musical bent of my work, you know, and that's how that all started. And, you know, I proceeded to, you know, do the publicity, the international publicity for his, you know, for the Harry Potter franchise for the next 5 years, you know.
Awesome.
And for a couple of
go ahead and we're going to go fast forward a little bit later into your career.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah. So this photograph is quite, we have this as a print, and it's quite massive. It measures 13.9 feet wide by about 5 feet high. And it's taken with an SL. This is from the TV series on Netflix called Longmire. And the subject in that photograph is Robert Taylor, a very popular Australian actor who kind of exclusively works on American products these days. And this is in Santa Fe. You know, a setting that just paints itself. It's pretty hard to take a bad photograph out there. Yeah, you know, this is actually 2 photographs stitched together. So yeah, with the SL. So I basically took a picture of him framed heavily to the left. Anyway, I frame all my photographs horizontally generally. And then I just sort of, it was just a manual quick pan, all handheld. I thought, okay, I'll take a picture a little bit to the right as well, and maybe we can do something with it later. And then, yeah, we stitched together, and that's what came out of it. The one thing I learned about this, because these are early days of me working with mirrorless camera, you know, and we had the 007 out there as well, the S medium format, which is, as you know, a single lens reflex camera, has the mirror protecting the sensor and everything. And what I learned, you know, we were out there changing lenses with the mirrorless cameras, and you know, I didn't have a blower brush. I didn't even think about stuff like that because I was so used to working with the 007. And you know, there's a little bit of a breeze, and we're in the desert. And when we got back, and I started looking at this photograph, the sky, the blue sky, just showed so much dust specks. That was, you know, like a little bit of work getting rid of those dust specks, and the stitching part was actually pretty easy. But that's when I learned, yep, you need to take a blower brush when you're out on location and just give it a couple of squirts, and then you're right to go, and you save yourself a lot of time in Photoshop. But
Yeah, for this
yeah,
print, if you guys haven't,
that print,
well, most haven't seen this in person, but it's huge. It's like, it's over 10, it's like what, 15 feet or 14 feet or
yes,
something.
13.9 feet wide. And, you know, it was printed beautifully by Milk Studios here in Los Angeles. And the print was so big that they didn't actually have anywhere that they could lay it out and show me the print. They literally had to have someone stand there as the printer fed the print out, and they'd roll it up a little bit, and, you know, then they'd take a couple of steps back as it printed out another few inches, and the ink will dry, and then they roll it up a little bit more. And I was only able to see this print when, you know, they gave me their word that it looked great. And the only time I finally saw it was when it came back from the framers. And it was mounted on acrylic and sandwiched on acrylic with the back frame. So it's like a 14-foot sheet of glass hanging off the wall, printed on chromogenic metallic paper. It's just, it's kind of jaw-dropping.
Hey Dennis, for the gearheads out there, what lens did you use, and were you zoomed in, or were you
24 to 90, 24 to 90. I think if I looked at the metadata recently, I was shooting at around about 30, 35 mil, you know, something like that. So it wasn't too, sort of, didn't have too much of that super wide feel to it. But yeah, at that stage, you know, that was early days of the SL2, the SL as well. I can't say SL2 anymore because there is an SL2. That were the early days of the SL. So when the SL first came out, the only lens available for it, other than, you know, if you use the M lenses with the adapter, was the 24 to 90. So at that stage, when I was on that job, I only had the SL with the 24 to 90, and I think around that time, not long after, I got the Noctilux for it as well. But pretty much everything that I shot on Longmire was with the 24 to 90, which is you know, it's a staggering lens. You know, it's there are so many, you know, glass elements in there that make that lens work like a prime at no matter what zoom level. It's amazing. You know, like all the Leica zooms are incredible. They're like primes no matter what point you zoom to. So I really enjoy using that lens as the go-to for everything I need, as well as architectural photography that I still do every now and again.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy seeing this in the print up close, because there's little, I
Yeah,
remember, you know, out of all the images, when I first saw it, the first thing I looked at was like at one of the little bushes there, and you're like, out of everything in the shot,
yeah,
you're gonna comment about the tip of the leaves and how the lights
yeah,
hit the bushes, and
yeah.
it's pretty
It's
detailed.
crazy. And I mean, you look like the subject in the photograph is, you know, in real terms, is about the height of a matchstick, and you can still kind of literally read the Remington logo on his rifle, you know.
Yeah. So we're gonna go ahead and fast forward into the future here. This is gonna be this is a little treat for some of the sci-fi fanatics out there.
Oh yeah, yeah, Star Trek. Yeah, so this is such a wonderful yeah, memory for me. This is an actor who I was a huge fan of before I got to work on Star Trek. His name's Anson Mount, and he was on a TV series called Hell on Wheels. And then he, of course, ends up playing a very iconic captain in Star Trek Discovery, Captain Pike, you know. And he always had his dog Mac with him wherever he went on set. Such a wonderful puppy who was, I think at the time, it was suffering from some form of, canine version of ALS or so, which is why his tongue is hanging out. The dog has passed away since, unfortunately, but he was just sitting in his chair waiting, for setups to happen with Mac on his lap, and I was just taking fun sort of editorial, sort of sneaky shots of him, and he said, "Oh, let me do something." And so he, I got further back, and then he just sort of leaped out of the chair with this, like, a look at the expression on his face. He's got this captainly intent. Something's going on. It's very action. It's like without Mac in the shot, it's actually like a scene from Star Trek. Something's going on with the screen. And the dog is just like making absolute perfect eye contact with the camera as well. So he ended up framing that photograph, and there's quite a big print of that hanging in his home. And I think we're working on a Star Trek Discovery book, which is shot entirely on every Leica that I have, and this image is going to have to be a 2-page spread across a 17-inch coffee table book. But such a beautiful dog. He was so cute and sweet. And I remember when I went into the reading, before I'd met anybody, the dog just spent like 5 minutes crawling across the boardroom and put himself in between my feet and just laid there in the entire time. And I'd never met Anson, and never met anybody on set until that point. And then at the end of the read-through, Anson came up to me and said, "Well, I guess if my dog likes you, you're okay." And we became good friends after that.
That's great. Hey, Dennis, we're gonna take a few questions right now.
Sure.
Antonio from Leica is our product specialist. He's got a few lined up for us, Dennis.
Hey, Dennis. So I've got a few good questions. You're generating quite some buzz here. Just to kind of wrap up on the Longmire photo. It was asked, where was it first displayed? Was it at your studio or for an event?
That photograph actually first came up in our we've actually got a Longmire coffee table book, which is around 250 pages of images dedicated to this show. Which I think we have copies of it at the Leica store in Los Angeles, and you can get it online on our website and on Amazon too, I think, as well. So that photograph first came up in a 17-inch by 11-inch coffee table book, and it actually goes across those 2 pages. So essentially, when you open that up as a centerfold in the coffee table book, it's actually a 34-inch print. And then after that, we ended up printing that as it was just an experiment, just decided to see how big we could go, and just with the proportions of the two, the two SL photographs are stitched together. They're 35mm format, but then we've cropped that right in as well, because I love widescreen. I have a bit of a cinematography background, so I tend to shoot everything horizontal. And the wonderful thing about even the SL1 at 24 megapixels, but even more so with the SL2 now, is I have no reason to turn the camera on its side anymore, which goes against my grain anyway. I love widescreen and I love horizontal, but I can even take a full length toe to head portrait of somebody with the camera horizontally and still crop in and get a super high resolution, beautiful image of that person as a vertical portrait that you can print on a magazine or a billboard or anything.
So Dennis, we got a question. While shooting on set, do you make an effort to match the visual language of the show itself, or are you using your own voice to portray your own shots?
That's an interesting question, because depending on the set and the situation, a show like Longmire, and in particular Frontier as well, which is a Jason Momoa series that I worked on, those shows are shot so rawly and available light to a degree that you actually have the ability to, from a lighting perspective, you can actually really experiment and play yourself with it. A show like Star Trek, for example, is beautifully lit, and you basically have these amazing director of photography lighting these scenes. So you generally can then just concentrate on finding a story yourself within the photograph with your composition and your angle. I work as what's considered, I guess, a specialist photographer. So a quote unquote set photographer, essentially, you know, and I saw these guys working on this on Star Trek. They essentially were putting the camera on top of the movie camera, and literally, you know, just pressing the button as the movie camera panned or dollied around. Whereas I was free, I'm actually there creating special photographs for books and for media and like for the Netflix banners and things like that. So I sort of sneak around and find unique angles that are completely different to what the show is portraying. So it is essentially my take on these things and my version of the drama of what's going on, sort of thing. And which is also tends to be limited by your accessibility. Sometimes scenes are so tight and crammed with crew and equipment that it's hard to get in there. But
well, on that note, what we'll do is we'll take us out of the studio, or sorry, the set, and we'll go into a more intimate situation.
Yeah. So this is a photo shoot that it was a little bit of a self-commissioned project between Jerry Ryan and I. Jerry is an absolutely gorgeous actress with a, you know, quite illustrious career, who first came to attention in the Star Trek series Voyager, which goes back, I think, to the early 2000s. And of course, she's been now cast in Star Trek Picard, which is the new kind of a continuation of Star Trek The Next Generation, which was the first series after the original Star Trek. So she's interestingly cross-pollinated across two very separate types of shows. And Jerry and I sort of met online on Instagram out of mutual admiration for each other's work, and had been trying to pull together a photo shoot for over a year, you know, and finally we were in the same place at the same time earlier this year. And we got together and we did this shoot. And again, you know, I always do a little bit of research, and you know, looking into all the images of her offline were always quite bright and colorful. Red dresses, you know, beautiful primary colors, and, you know, she's a beautiful blonde. And I just wanted to, you know, I always try to go a little bit in the opposite direction, and I just put it to her to do something a little bit darker and a little bit more edgy, you know, which I hadn't seen, you know, with the heavy makeup and everything like that. And I found a stylist who just had nothing but incredible, you know, polyester clothing with studs and, you know, antique Versace dress coats that were like made out of plastic and things like that. So we just went crazy and just had nothing but super dark colors. And the makeup's I like to start my makeup very light and just build up on it through the day. And so we started very neutral with some beautiful headshots, you know, and just general portraiture in my gallery. And then the makeup got darker and darker, and, you know, right down to the point where the eyes were just like intense black, heavy makeup. And I'm always pleased, you know, for me, you know, the ultimate sort of success in my eyes is never, you know, what or how much I get paid. It's seeing my subjects starting to use the photographs I take across their social media platforms as their avatars, whether it's IMDb or Instagram.
How do you decide if you're gonna take the big boy out or take an M or a Q? Like what do you gravitate towards, I guess?
I gravitate, it comes down to timing on the day. I like to try a little bit with all the cameras, because they all have a different personality in the way the image is captured, you know. For me, you know, I've got to get what I need and what I want. And primarily my number one tool to get the job done, whether it's a personal you know, expression of art, or whether it's you know, a commercial photograph that has a very specific agenda, my first and primary tool is always the SL. You know, so I start shooting with the SL, and I shoot the hell out of it the day with the SL. And then when I'm sort of happy that I've got what I need, then I start playing with a little bit more of the creative art form cameras, or things that I just don't get enough time to enjoy and I want to play with. So, I always post a picture of my, camera work table, and it has every camera body and lens out there. Whether I get to them all or not is another thing, but the next camera I always pick up after the SL, it will be the monochrome.
Speaking of multiple cameras, we're gonna show this image.
Yeah.
Oh.
There's a little bit of a time span in between those two cameras, but it's very similar in their feel, isn't it? I mean, look at the brass lenses. That's a picture of Jason on the set of independent film that we were shooting last year, and I believe at that time he had the very first ASC M10, which is just, oh my goodness, what a stunning camera. That's one that I've yet to add to the arsenal. It's just so beautiful. It's a camera designed for cinematographers, so they can actually not only use that camera as a traditional viewfinder to crop and frame shots, but you can go location scouting with that camera with the PL adapter and put the Leica cinema lenses on it. And it has all the framing guides for every film format and ratio, and it has lookup tables in it, and you can actually get amazing photographs of your location on your location scouts, and then use it as your director's viewfinder on the day and get shots. And when you shoot with the lookup table activated, the shots just out of the camera are jaw-dropping. They're like, I don't even need, the time that I got to use it a little bit and play with it, I took the shots out and they were like, I don't even need to run this through Lightroom or Photoshop. It's just beautiful, straight out of the camera, just an amazing equipment. But there was a photographer, I'll just finish, there was a photographer in the movie as a character, and the camera that's on his shoulder was the photographer the camera that the photographer used. And Jason was just, playing around with both the cameras, and there was just this beautiful moment where somebody distracted him with a joke and he looked to the side, and I just snapped that shot off, and it was just a wonderful moment. It's one of my favorite shots of him from that set. So
we're getting a lot of questions actually from people that want to see the contrast between photography and cinematography. Your work is definitely very cinematic, and I guess that was the company name, right? Cinematic Pictures.
Thank you. It's I started off just with a love and a passion for film and TV. It's all I ever enjoyed watching when I was younger, and I'd started off with Star Trek, and it's what kind of not only influences the subject matter and the feel, but as I said, I have a great deal of difficulty turning the camera vertically, and sometimes when you work for magazines, that's all they require are vertically composed images. And this picture that you're seeing of Jason on the set of Frontier is one of the very few photographs that you'll see of mine that are even actually quite centered. Most of my photographs are always, left or right justified. I tend to work heavily by the rule of thirds or the Fibonacci, where, the area of interest is always a little bit off center in the photograph. This particular image here was shot in, we were a bit of a guerrilla crew out in the western tablelands of Newfoundland. Very, very cold, minus 36 degrees at the time of that photograph being taken. And I decided that I was not going to, these conditions that we're shooting on in Newfoundland, we were shooting in the middle of, entire villages that were on fire. So at night, so even though it was cold and snowing, it was really hot and smoky, and there's fire everywhere, and intense heat, even where we're shooting from. And then the next time we're shooting in these minus 36, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And I decided, I took it on myself for some strange reason that I wasn't going to protect the camera in any way, or any of the optics. And I used the SL in completely raw form. So while it was raining and snowing, there was no plastic covers or blinks on the camera or anything like that to protect it. There were times, and I think I remember sending you photographs from my iPhone of the SL with the 24 to 90 on it, and the whole thing was literally white. It looked like a snow white camera because it was encased in ice, and all the rubber on the lenses were almost as hard as metal because they'd frozen. And you know, the camera never skipped a beat. I didn't notice any decline in the battery time. And then when I got back into the car or back home that night, I would let everything thaw out and dry it off, and it all looked and functioned like it was new out of the box. And I did that for 3 months, you know, so, and never suffered any issues with the camera. So I was quite amazed, you know, that my body was actually giving out long before the camera had any intention to.
So we have a lot of cinema questions. How do you feel about cropping, Dennis? Do you have a special aspect ratio that you go outside of 3:2?
Yeah. And you know, also, I guess if you go to various Instagram accounts and things like that, you'll see a lot of video that I shoot on these. I have a tendency to love to shoot video, especially the SL has this beautiful, you know, 100 frame, 120 frame, and now with the SL2s, 180 frames second, absolutely staggeringly beautiful slow motion. So I do a lot of really nice little 1-minute Instagram clips for all the jobs that I do to accompany the photography. My favorite ratio is 2:3:5:1. If I could do everything in life at 2:3:5:1, which is the traditional old, big, you know, very wide cinematic feel. But I tend to always crop at the very least. I will always go around about the 16 to 9, you know, and then squeeze in a little bit more. Photographically, even when I post something on Instagram, most of it will be around 2 to 1. You know, I very rarely leave any of my photographs in the traditional 35mm aspect.
So we're gonna break the genre here and go to a completely different type of photograph.
Oh, yeah. I only ever allow myself to do one wedding a year, and it always has to be a very special occasion, and only ever with friends. I'll never shoot a wedding of somebody that I don't know, no matter what the money being paid is. I think after I did this wedding, I turned down a wedding photo shoot for around $30,000 or $40,000 because weddings are so hard. They are too hard work-wise. They're just physically, you know, really knock you about. But this is Drew, Scott and Linda Fan, very dear friends of mine. Drew is part of, you know, the twin brother team with his brother Jonathan, the Property Brothers. They are literally you know, run the home renovation television show world with amazing TV shows that are a lot of fun.
So why is it cropped like that, Dennis?
Well, you know, this goes back to my propensity to dislike doing things vertically. This is about the only time I turned the camera on its side, and I did it obviously as a Dutch tilt because it was fun. And if I look at the photograph, I just want to try to catch the cake, a little bit of the cake in the background. You know, there's quite a height disparity between these two. Drew's like 6'3", 6'4". And so Linda's standing on a chair, and I did this as a fun shot. And I was shooting their wedding in Italy for People magazine. So there were photographs going out every day for the online and then for the cover of the physical magazine. So when People magazine asked me to submit all the photographs that they wanted me to use for the cover, I obviously sent these beautiful horizontal cinematic creative shots that were like really cool and beautiful. 10 of my favorite, most stunning shots of these guys. And people got back to me and said, none of these are any good. You know, we cannot use these for the cover. They're not, you know, what we put on the cover. Please have a look at, you know, they sent me a zip file of the last 10 People magazine covers, and they were all the same. They were all like this waist to head, cutesy couple, heads together shot. And I didn't take a single photograph at that wedding like that, except for this one. And that's a testament to the SL that we were able to crop that in enough and rotate it out to what you see now for a magazine cover, so that's the before and the after shot. So this is typically the sort of thing that they wanted for the cover, not my take on what a wedding photograph should look like. So literally there's one photograph out of probably the 4,700 photographs that I took over 4 days at the wedding that was usable for the cover, and that was it. So yeah, most of my stuff, like this was the sort of stuff I was sending them with, thinking this would be a great magazine cover. But obviously it doesn't fit the format because you need all this room. The subject has to be quite large in the photograph, and you need all this room for the text that they put on there, and who's breaking up with who, and which actor is now an alcoholic, to go with the cover of the magazine. So yeah, this is the sort of stuff I was sending them, but it just didn't work for them. But what I did was I actually did all the recropping on that previous image and worked on it, and then I sent that to them as a vertically composed photograph, and they loved that, and that's the one that ended up being the cover. But this was just a beautiful event. It's as I said, I do a wedding like this, and then I come back and I'm so exhausted for a week that I say I'm never going to do another wedding again. And then a year passes and I forget how tough it was, and then I say yes to the next person. Yeah, but I allow myself one a year, and that's it. They are good fun, but they are really hard work.
So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the chat window and catch up on all the comments here.
Yeah.
Let's see what we've got going on.
Got some great questions, Phil, if you want to go through some technical stuff.
Yeah, so Antonio, go for it.
Dennys, because of your cinematic influence and the way you see both worlds, we had one question where someone asked if you use any anamorphic lenses, either just for fun or for stills or for video.
I haven't had the opportunity to use actual physical anamorphic lenses. I have used the Leica Cine lenses, the full range, the Cs, and they are a lot of fun to use as well. They have just a whole new look and personality to still images, and I discovered that when I actually used the Cine lens kit with the adapter on the SL to shoot a music video. And while I was shooting those music video in between scenes, I was just taking stills as well, and I was just staggered by, again, this interesting look and bokeh from these beautiful cinema lenses. Of course, Leica are known for their incredible optics, and the Leica Cine lenses are Academy Award-winning lens. So I eventually end up borrowing these lenses every now and again and using them for still shoots, and then you go back to your having to manual focus. You get used to the SL as such a pinpoint, hyper fast quiet autofocus camera, so having to put your lens on that other ring on the camera and actually twist it and bring the lens into sharpness is a whole other skill level. But it's very easy to do with Leica optics, because you can just, everything's so clear and you can actually really tell your critical focus quite easily. My favorite lenses to use on across the board on all the Leicas with the L mounts are the Noctilux, of course. The look and feel and the bokeh of the 50mm and the 75mm Noctilux are indescribable. They're so cinematic in their feel, and they make your subject pop out of the background, and then the rest of it is just this beautiful softness that's really hard to sort of quantify with words, and in particular, when I was working on Frontier, I almost exclusively used the 50mm Noctilux, because most of that show was shot at night and lit realistically with candles and with burning torches. So nearly everything I shot on Frontier was 3600 ISO and higher. And again, the properties of the Noctilux just rendered that the noise that comes with shooting at those ratios into this beautiful filmic grain. So it's the one thing that I like about the Leica optics, is that they you know, even things that you try to avoid, like high ISOs that bring in digital noise, you know, they render that into something that's quite beautiful, you know. So it all goes back to my love for film and grain and, you know, old school sort of.
Hey, Dennis, since there's a lot of cinema questions, I'm going to go ahead and pop up one of the videos you took or you shared yesterday for those that didn't.
Off to moving picture land. Yeah, and I have to say, especially with the SL2, the movie camera that they have built into the SL2 in cine mode, so you've actually got shutter blade angles instead of shutter speeds, you know, just stunning, you know, just amazing, amazing. Oh yeah, so this is, I shot a lot of behind the scenes stuff because this set was so rich and amazing. I don't know how. Are you scrubbing through that at the moment? Or is that playing? Yeah, so I did all these digital slow motion portraits, which of all the characters and the actors. And you know, one thing, if you stop and look at any of this stuff here, this is Noctilux, if you stop and look at any of these images, this is video, right? One thing that I found really fascinating with the SL in particular was that I could take this video and pause any of the footage anywhere and do a screen grab on my Mac, and I've done it on purpose just as a bit of a test and put it up online and create these amazing stills that look like beautiful photographs that are taken with the camera as a stills camera, but they're screen grabs of video, you know, and you can find these beautiful moments in video footage that, you know, a lot more, are very natural because you're just moving around and shooting with the subjects and they may not be aware of what you're doing, you know. So I actually do a little bit of this where I'll actually do kind of like a still session with somebody, but I'm actually shooting video. And so it becomes like a motion portrait, like what you see here. And I mean, we're seeing a very staggered sort of version of this. Again, if you go online onto Instagram and so forth, you'll see the beautiful 120 frames a second slow motion that all this stuff comes out across. But all this stuff that you're looking at now is just all shot at night, super high ISO, and just absolutely beautiful.
Is there a lot of these wide open with the Noctilux, either in your stills or in the video?
You know, it was a difficult situation to shoot in, you know. So pretty much everything that was at night was shot 0.95 wide open. So I worked in conjunction with the focus peaking, which obviously is a great cinematic tool. So whenever you get that red, green or blue shimmer, whichever color you choose it to be, you're basically constantly focus pulling to get the still shot, which I eventually after a while became pretty proficient at doing that. Although I still haven't in my life met anybody that manually focuses a camera as quickly as Phil does. He's like a human high-speed Leica autofocus system. But yeah, the focus peaking along with the incredibly sharp critical focus of the Noctilux, where you can, with that digital viewfinder in the SL, you can just really tell whether it's in focus or not quite easily. And I don't have great eyesight to begin with, so for me it was just a wonderful thing having that beautiful, I think it's a 2K you know, viewfinder in the eyepiece, and then these beautiful optics make manually focusing just something that I stepped away from, was terrified of. Was so happy when the SL had this, you know, crosshair that you could put on somebody's pupil and autofocus very rapidly. So for me, with my, you know, very below average eyesight, to be able to go back to manually focusing has been a real thrill for me. Something I could never do with the Canons, you know, when I used to shoot Canon in the early days.
Yeah, we got actually some great. So we go from the gear stuff. I know a lot of people love the gear, but also I think inspiration is key here. So we got a two-in-one question. Some great questions from everyone, guys. So please keep putting them in the Q&A and in the chat. One person asked, you know, how do you approach and work with a new subject, getting them comfortable when you're using them? Because a lot of your photos are very intimate. And then the follow-up to that is another question someone asked, where then after the photo shoot, all that goes into the relationships and keeping them alive. So, you're not just photographing someone once, maybe, you work with a lot of artists on such repeat occasions. So if anything, you can add to that too.
Yeah. That's actually, they're both really, really good questions, because I have a kind of a unique approach to doing even the really big commercial shoots when it comes to that sort of comfort and intimacy. Obviously a little bit harder to get on a film set when there's 200 or 300 people out there, but on a film set, for example, being a behind the camera guy, I have a great deal of respect for everybody that's working really hard, right down to your grips and your focus pullers and everybody. So I love taking pictures of, camera operators and DPs and directors directing and things like that. So, when I'm on a new film set where I've just met everybody for the first time, my first call of duty is to get great shots of the crew, and within those days start emailing those shots of them looking really great, doing what they love doing. And once you've done that, and you've sent a couple of photographs of the actors that are, something that they've not normally seen, you immediately ingratiate yourself with them, and they know that what you're doing is very respectful of their craft. And the next thing you know, they're all your best friends, and then they're helping you get the best shots you can get by suggesting where to go, or even pausing production for you, which usually never happens, so you can get the shot you need. So, when you're working on set, I can't emphasize how important it is to get cool shots of the cast and crew, and especially the crew. So that's how I work on set, because I love the crew anyway. When it comes to the one-on-one portraits, even when I was working with Daniel Radcliffe, the one thing that's always important to me is to avoid static of too many people. So typically on a shoot of a actor of Dan's caliber, you would have stylists, you would have hair, you would have makeup, you would have the production there, overlooking you and looking at it, tethered with a laptop, everybody looking at what you're doing. And, there'd be a cast of hundreds, and for the actor, it's just another photo shoot. And so not surprisingly, most of the actors that I work with, who, when I'm self-commissioned and it's not a job that I'm sent out to do, are like, oh, I got to tell you, I really hate doing photo shoots. That's the first thing I hear so often, but when I'm doing these shots, even when I was shooting Dan in London, that shot of him smirking that we first saw, as I said in the story, I'm fumbling around, tripping over my own cables, setting up, because I found a two-in-one, a hairstylist, and a mate, like this wonderful Australian hairdresser who was a great makeup artist and a great stylist. So I had my clothing stylist, hair and makeup all in one person. And then I had my business partner, Ken Meir, who was my ideas guy. That's it. There's three of us and we're all chums. And then there's the subject. And you can, when you've got only two other people on set and it's essentially just you and the actor, you can't help but start to feel comfortable as a subject and open yourself up a little bit more. And that's kind of my quote unquote secret, is to keep your crew lean if that's what you're looking for. On a shoot as big as that, and some of these shoots paid in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, I still kept the crew absolutely, bare bones. And when I shot
speaking of bare bones, we're coming up to the end of the hour here, so we can open up questions. Speaking of bare bones, I asked this with Bill Brown earlier this week. We were talking about zombie apocalypse, and you had one lens and one camera that you're going to take with you right now. What's it going to be?
SL with an Octilux 50mm.
Really? All right.
I've said this many times. If I could arc weld a 50mm onto my SL and never take it off, that's what I'd do. Obviously we need other lenses for versatility, but I cannot emphasize how much I love the Noctilux series of lenses, the 75 and the 50. I would never use anything else. I'm just using my new acquisition at the moment, which is I don't know if people see me on the Zoom, I'm not very experienced with it, but I bought a an M6 and it's got a 75mm Noctilux on it at the moment. So I'm trying to range find, focus old school film with this beautiful new lens. But yeah, that's I would just use Noctiluxes if I could all the time.
Cool. So let's see, we got time for a couple more questions and then we're gonna wrap, guys. Let's see, do we have anyone on deck, Antonio?
Yeah, so we've got another great question that links to Dennys, what you're saying about working with a set, with a crew, keeping people happy. But do you feel that sometimes when you work on these sets, do your hands get tied sometimes, where you have to work within the constraints between the studio, what the client wants, and can that hinder creativity? And if so, how do you work around that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to be very respectful of the environment you're in, because you're there. And in my particular situation, in many cases where I'm not a hired photographer, I'm there almost as a guest, and being allowed to do what I do, so that we could, like with the Longmire book and with Star Trek and with Frontier, I was there to shoot for the book publishing that our company creates. So I'm essentially like a guest on these shows. So that's why it's so much more important for me to, ingratiate myself and do beautiful work and respect what is going on the set and not be a hindrance to it. And that can be a little difficult. You can get frustrated going, trapped in a corner because all the equipment is wedged over in one side where there's a great shot, and you're sort of going, oh my goodness, if I could just move, this is so beautiful, and you miss the moment. But then as you get to know people, and this is where it's important to be that kind of person, which is very accommodating. Within a few days, you're at a point where there's a shot that's just been really beautiful, and you can actually say, you can start to say, can you just stay there for a second so I can grab a shot? And the secret is to be really quick and efficient and fast. And that's why, and silent, that's why I love shooting with these, SL mirrorless. You don't have to put any of these encasings on them, and the autofocus is so quick and everything just works great. And if you accidentally have to shoot 5 stops under, there's so much latitude in the DNGs in the Leica RAWs that you can still get a great photograph out of them. But I just, after a few days, when you've been really good with everybody, you find the crew start to say, hey, this is a really good shot, do you want to grab this before we break up the scene? And that's the idea. That's why
we gotta wrap. Do you want to talk about the women of sci-fi?
Oh yeah, so I launched a book a few years ago called Men of Science Fiction. It's 180 pages of beautiful editorial images of male actors in the genre, with stories from each of the actors. Volume 2, which I'm working on at the moment, is Women of Science Fiction, and my latest shoot for that book was with Jerry Ryan, who you see here now. And going back to what I was saying before, I was literally shooting alone with Jerry without an assistant, and even she looked at me and said, how are you doing all this by yourself? Why are you doing all this by yourself? And we got such beautiful, intimate, and just silly and fun shots because of that, that one-on-one friendship that you developed during the shoot. And of course, then you end up with these beautiful shots like this, which are very sort of moody and soulful. And so yeah, this is part of Women of Science Fiction, which will obviously feature Jerry. I've got a few more Star Trek actresses that I want to shoot. And we've got Trisha Helfer and Katie Sackhoff from Battlestar Galactica, and a whole raft of Stargate, Amanda Tapping, all this sort of stuff. So we're working on piecing that together now physically from a design point of view, and then probably 1 or 2 more shoots of actresses that I really want to honor in this book to come, and hopefully we'll be doing a little bit of talking about the release of that later in the year.
Awesome. For those of you that want to follow Dennys on Instagram, we have his name in the yellow there. These are all the hashtags that we're following on social media right now, guys. We would like to thank everybody for showing up. Dennys, thank you so much for all your time, and I'm sure you've inspired a lot of people. It's quite a discussion here. So
yeah, thanks for having me, and really appreciate you guys continuing keeping the community together during these very difficult times with everybody. If anybody wants to reach out to me via direct message on Instagram as well, if you need any advice or inspiration, please feel free to drop me a line. I'm always responsive to anybody that needs to chat about cool stuff and Leica and photography and everything.
Cool. All right, thanks, Dennis. Thanks
Take
for
care,
everyone
guys.
that showed
Yeah.
up.
Ciao.
We'll see you soon.